Northwest.
Representando a todos los Albis en los Estados Unidos con Dro Breeze.
You are listening to,
You already know,
the DroInTheKnow podcast with your host,
the one and only
Dro Breeze.
Happy New Week, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the DroInTheKnow podcast. As always, I am your host, Dro Breeze, for the week. Straight out the bat, I want to give a big shout out to all the supporters who have been tuning in on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other digital platforms. It really means a lot, and if you really like what you hear, please make sure to hit that subscribe button on your digital platform. It truly would be appreciated. I have a great episode for all you folks tonight. I know it's been a crazy ride all throughout the world. Have the faith. We're slowly but surely seeing that light at the end of that tunnel, because I know that this pandemic is just really starting to put a strain on us. I know that many of us are just thankful, including myself, to be in a position where we can find ways to keep the faith and keep rolling with these punches and still live to see another day. I know we're all truly thankful for that, because we also need to see the bigger picture of this whole situation and understand that this is a war that we're fighting with an invincible enemy, which happens to be this damn fucking virus. I know these stories are so repetitive. I know you see it on the media, you hear it with coworkers, etc. I'm not going to get there, but I'm just saying, if you're one of the lucky ones, we also need to understand and be mindful of those unfortunate ones, the ones that are working in those industries that are dealing with hardships and just seeing before their own eyes the extraordinary industrial transformation in a new economy. And I'm taking this episode to a different tone because I strongly feel that with the pandemic comes opportunity. What type of opportunity, you may ask? Well, if you look back at every world war, every tragedy, certain things just never come back to being the same. But, just look at the Industrial Revolution and see how that changed manufacturing jobs. Or not too long ago, how terrorism, 9/11, changed the way we fly airplanes, and it overhauled the entire airline industry. And I know that there are many sectors that have been really hit hard as we approach this 1-year anniversary since the pandemic started. But no other sector, and believe me when I say this, if you haven't noticed, has truly been placed at the top of that list to meet the new destiny than the entertainment industry of the world. If you just take a quick look on how artists are unable to make a living, or how venues and nightclubs are struggling to deal with this situation, I truly feel that the entertainment industry of yesterday will no longer be the same for tomorrow. It's the truth. It's been hit and left in ruins, hanging off a thread. If you look at every city near you, of course, with the exception of, irresponsible states such as Florida and Texas. And no, that doesn't go to the people. That goes to the ones in charge. All the main nightclub strips in every city across the world, or nearly every city across the world, are struggling, either bankrupt or out of business. That is a new reality. Many DJs, bartenders, underground musicians, and yes, even the dancers have been hit and left in financial ruins. Shutdowns are responsible. We all know that. And I know that stay-home restrictions have a lot to do with this. And even though I am pro-restrictions, because, we are dealing with the realities, and this is for humanity. I mean, this is a virus that's really harming people. I know some people are, getting through this easily, and other people are being affected differently. But it is an unfortunate situation regardless of where you stand on this topic. And we hope that things can pick up for everybody again, because these are the harsh realities. And a couple weeks ago, I actually came across a segment on YouTube produced by an up-and-coming video producer for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And he was discussing the future of nightclubs, and I just had to invite him onto the show. So before I do introduce my next guest, I want to share a clip of this segment, which he actually posted on YouTube. I will be providing the information at the end of this episode, so I want you all to check it out. I hope you enjoy the interview. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Here we go. Here's a clip of the segment.
The city has lost half of its original clubs, and a similar story appears to be unfolding in many areas across the world. Clubbing is very much in decline.
This was all happening before coronavirus hit the scene, so who's really to blame here?
Well, surprise, surprise, it's the millennials. Yup, notorious for ruining institutions such as marriage, doorbells, diamonds, cereal, and napkins, millennials can also proudly take credit for the decline of clubbing. The reasons why are complex. There's the rise of new technology providing cheaper and more convenient alternatives to what clubbing used to provide. For hookups, you can use Tinder or Bumble. If you want to discover new music, there's Spotify or TikTok memes. Then there's the changing economy. Millennials often don't have the same job security and incomes of previous generations, so it's understandable that we might be hesitant to pay $20 for cover and $13 for a Heineken. Finally, some say that young people today are just different. Instead of going out and partying, we're Netflix and chilling and practicing self-care. We've single-handedly created a renaissance in hobbies like gardening, embroidery, and journaling. Could it be that millennials have just gone mild?
My next guest is a video producer for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC Vancouver. It's with great pleasure to welcome Mr. Utaye Lee. Thanks for taking the time and joining me on this podcast, Utaye.
It's a pleasure to be here, Dro. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So, as millennials, we have seen so much in our lifetime already. I mean, we've seen terrorism, great recessions, expensive housing markets, low wages, COVID, lockdowns, and whatever else is coming our way. And
I don't even want to think about it. It's been a ride.
Exactly. And the one thing that was meant to entertain us and just zone us out of this nightmare that we've been dealing with during COVID times, which is nightclubs, are just nowhere to be found, with the exception of Florida, of course. But at least, in markets with responsible leadership, such as in California, Washington, and out in Canada where you're at, I came across your segment on YouTube where you were discussing the problems that these nightclubs are already facing pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. And you really had it on the money, especially in how you challenged nightclubs to take this opportunity and reinvent themselves and brand themselves correctly. So based on your research with these COVID markets, when can we expect establishments to reopen again, or at least go back to norm,
I mean, to answer that first part, like with COVID, who the heck knows? Honestly,
I
this
understand.
pandemic just seems to be unrelenting. And I mean, of course, the vaccine being on the horizon is promising and reassuring to some extent. But I feel like 2021 for me is the year of skeptical optimism. I am not going to believe anything to be recovering until I literally see it in the flesh, in person. But I mean, there's the second part to that question to me that was really what was most interesting to me for this video. It is not just about clubs in the context of this pandemic, but clubs really just in the context of this decade, of this sort of moment in cities. My background is in urban planning. I don't know if you're familiar with that profession, but
I am.
It really studies, sort of how cities develop, how they change over time. And, to me, there was an interesting overlap here. So you mentioned the nightclub and kind of, that being a real sort of source of entertainment, pleasure, you name it, for sort of a younger generation. I started this video off with sort of the premise that it might have been back in the day in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. Nightclubs were really, that's kind of where that was ground zero for cultural movements, for new sounds, genres, new changes in fashion even. But something happened to clubs kind of in the mid 2000s, in the 2010s, something especially in more I'd say cosmopolitan cities like Vancouver and Toronto, and I'm not going to comment too much on the States because I don't really know as much. But something happened where clubs started to become much more commercialized.
Don't you just hate that though?
Right. Well, when you think of the clubs of the 70s, or we got disco, we've got the first generation of Black civil rights movement leaders partying in these clubs with recently out homosexuals, right? The Stonewall Inn, that was a nightclub, right? But it was also very politically relevant spaces.
You mean the
80s and
anti-establishment
90s.
movements?
Yeah, exactly. Very anti-establishment, especially the 80s and 90s, right? You look into rave culture and how these kids really were organizing illegal underground parties in warehouses, but at the same time starting new genres of music. The entire genre of EDM and all its subgenres started in the nightclub, right? But then fast forward to 2010, and I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, the clubs that I went to, they were playing the top 50 pop hits, you know?
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
was really just a place to get laid. And for me, this video kind of started with this question of like, how did we get to this place? Like, why have clubs sort of become more obsessed about charging top dollar for cover, making as much money as possible, and catering
I
to the
agree.
most, basic sort of palette, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, I understand that, yeah. And that now I'll be honest with you, I mean, it's been probably 5 years since I've actually been in a nightclub. I think the bachelor
Mm,
party was probably the last time. And, while
okay.
watching your special segment, and you just kinda described it, you used this perfect term, which was
Mm.
McDonaldization of
Oh,
nightclubs. I that's the best way to describe it because,
right.
it feels like in every city. So, I'm out here in Washington, but if
Mm.
you walk around Seattle, you walk around, Vancouver, or even in California, I've noticed that it's like every club is copying each other.
Yeah.
It's like as if you look everywhere, you just see that they're all following the same trend. You don't
Mm.
see that heavy metal nightclub or that hip hop nightclub anymore. It's as if they're trying to. I mean, I guess it's just bad for business, I guess. But do you
Absolutely. I totally, what I'd say is like there's just truly a lack of diversity at
exactly?
times in
Yeah,
the nightlife, especially when you go to uh, sort of like the high streets in downtown areas, right? The places where all the high real estate values are, like, like those
exactly,
are the clubs that nobody local would even really want to go to. Like all the clubs that people actually care about tend to be more on the outskirts in these sort of like
exactly.
haphazard underground areas. And
Yeah,
I think you bring up a good point. I think simply put, there's a very economic financial reason for this to be happening. Obviously a nightclub that is, more focused on cultivating a culture and an artistic culture.
yeah,
They might not be as focused on, making as much money as possible. They might be more focused on making a space more accessible to artists, to the general public, right? They might not be
mhm,
charging $20 for cover. They might be charging $5, right?
yeah,
But it's
yeah,
really about creating a vibe. That type of nightclub, or type of nightlife. I don't know what the term I might call it. It just can't compete with, like a very high end nightclub that is much more focused about looking exclusive and playing
yeah,
music that's just going to get everybody, bumping and grinding and whatnot.
yeah,
So, I think that's like, the obvious reason, to me, where the plot thickened to me, you know,
yeah,
was really kind of understanding how uh, recent sort of changes and different like sort of developments in how cities urbanize was really affecting that kind of nightlife dynamic.
yeah. I can see that. I mean, if you kind of look back to the '80s, and I'm
Mm,
just going. I mean, I was barely young. I was I wasn't around that time really,
mm,
but I remember that everything was much more affordable, especially with housing. And I remember that nightclubs used to be all kind of, and it goes out to almost every
mm,
city in North America. They all
right.
kind of use the same grid where everything in the West End is really expensive.
Mm.
Everything in the East is, the more shadier parts of town. And that's where the good nightclubs used to be all the time. And it's
Right.
now kind of the redevelopment where now you're kind of seeing those young millennials like ourselves that are
Mhm.
taking that hipster thing and, converting those really bad neighborhoods into,
Oh,
the place to be,
we're doing our thing. Yeah.
with the coffee shops and all that.
Right.
But my question to you is,
Hmm.
with based on your research and everything like that,
Hmm.
do you think that post COVID, with despite with social media, I saw your report where you're saying that
Right.
social media is giving people more access than having to go to the nightclubs.
Hmm.
Do you think that this could bring back the glory days to nightclubbing in the sense that it's,
Gosh.
I mean, people are losing their jobs.
Yeah.
Income is not high anymore.
Hmm.
I mean, based on everything, and we kind of, as millennials, we face a lot of hardships already as is, and to
Hmm.
add the COVID lockdowns, do you think that knowing that we're not going to be spending our money on
Mm.
$30 cover for a nightclub that looks like McDonald's with heavy dress
Right.
codes and listening to the same music? Have you noticed that when you go to a nightclub
Mm.
on a strip, you notice that it's pretty much every nightclub on that strip is playing the exact same music,
Mhm.
and it's just like different colors, same club, same vibe.
Right, exactly. Right. And different songs, but just at different times of the night, but it's like, or
Exactly.
same songs every time of the yeah, I mean, I'll be the first to say it, like, the economic hardship of COVID-19 has been really hard for
Yeah.
a lot of people, and a lot of industries have been severely impacted by it. I don't want to, you know, uh, uh, put down sort of the gravity of that situation, but I will say that, as you mentioned, like I think, economic downturns create voids, create empty spaces that will be filled eventually with new
Yeah.
types of life, of new types of industries and businesses, and perhaps that is something that I'm personally going to be very curious about. Downtown office spaces, downtown residential spaces are now down, gosh, something like 15 to 20% in some of the major cities across North America.
Yeah.
uh, there, a lot of those spaces are going to be empty in the new year. I mean, what goes to fill those spaces, right? I think
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, maybe we'll the reality of a new economy force many nightclubs to rethink what their offering is, right?
Maybe
Like,
that blue collar type of,
exactly.
audience.
Absolutely. Right. Like, I sure as hell probably won't tolerate a $20 cover and an $8 drink in the new year. Like, I'm going to be skimping a little bit. And if I
$8.
find,
Can you please tell me where that was? Because the last time I saw that, it was like $20 just to have one beer. It's like,
oh my goodness. Yeah. You got to come back up to Vancouver, man. That's where the prices
yeah,
are a little better, maybe. But
yeah,
I think there's a lot of open questions about what could happen. And like when I, you know, as I was like writing that video, as I got to
yeah,
that conclusion, I realized I don't have too many of the answers, which is just a classic cop out. But I really mean that as like, I think we don't really know. And I think in instances where we don't know, I think we can
yeah.
be more intentional, right? There is this big question mark looming over nightlife and the nightlife industry with COVID. Uh, I think it gives us an opportunity to take stock of the moment we're in and be much more deliberate about how we support our nightlife, our local community culture,
Exactly. Yeah.
in the years moving forward. I think definitely in the last decade, I would argue that we've really kind of forgotten about it. And I think
It's
in
true.
our, yeah,
No, it's
in
completely
our,
true.
yeah, if you don't mind me adding, like, I think in our sort of conquest to really like bring in new capital and investment and development into downtown cities, we've sort of forgotten that those downtown cities were the venues for our nightlife, for our culture, right? Like these
For the
empty
vibe, for
warehouses. Yeah.
the print of the city is based
Right.
on what the local community presents
Yeah,
as you're aware, and that's the thing I was actually going to ask you in addition to that.
for
Um,
sure.
so based on your studies, I know
Mhm.
you did this special segment, and this is just basically based on your opinion. I know that we don't know the answers, we don't know what's going on,
For sure. For
but
sure.
based on your studies, on your report,
Mhm.
how do you think local musicians and artists can survive with the absence of nightclubs? Because
Mm.
with streaming services, and there's another part to that, but I'll ask you in a second. But
Mhm.
what do you think musicians can do in the meantime, with based on your studies? And I know you saw the reports
Yeah.
with Europe and all the places. Like,
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I will say a lot of my research was very pessimistic, to say the least, in terms of what can. Yeah. I mean, during this time, I think there are more sort of internet-based solutions for sure. I do. Will that, like, can that ever become
the
a
audience, yeah,
replacement for the actual income that an artist might receive having a venue with real ticket holding uh, audience members? I really don't think so. I mean, for my personal opinion, I actually
yeah,
think this is a time where we as society recognize the value of the arts and give them a bailout. Same
yeah,
way
no, it's true.
you might bail out a big bank or the
Yeah,
auto
they do that
industry,
already. Yeah,
right? We have precedent. I think here in North America, I mean, gosh, like down in the States, you guys are a powerhouse of culture creation. And I mean,
yeah,
that's the shit we're consuming right now. And this, like, while we're opening up our Netflix and we're, listening to Spotify, like all of that shit, that is culture that artists, musicians, TV writers, producers, they've created, and and that's an industry that is flailing right now. I would find it incredibly ironic that in a time when we are consuming so much art and culture, that is also a period where that industry is struggling to stay alive.
And if you notice all the classics like movies and music, it seems that it's a repetitive story. Hardships produce amazing art. Yeah, if you notice
Oh,
that,
yeah,
if you
yeah,
think about it, like it's always like the music comes out of this something always. It's like
for
that rose
sure.
through the concrete type of
Well,
situation, right?
I totally get that. I bet you there's going to be a whole genre of art and music and some stuff that just comes out of this moment, right? Like I can't
Yeah.
wait for the albums that are going to be dropping in 2021 because like freaking like musicians, while they didn't have time to tour or play venues
Yeah.
every night, they were in there, I mean, obviously struggling, but they were hopefully also turning that struggle to some extent into the art that they always produce so well. I really don't want to come off as insensitive to that struggle right now, because I think like I'm be careful not to frame it as like every downturn is an opportunity for good things. So don't worry, like
Exactly.
everything. Like I feel like first things first, like people that are struggling, people that would have been in the music, film
Industry. Yeah.
industries, they need help. But it's not lost on me that also in times like this, there is, there are just the opportunities are limitless for what can
Can
emerge.
happen. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's especially with social media. I mean,
for
can you
sure.
imagine if this whole lockdown thing happened during the 90s? We
Oh,
wouldn't
geez.
have any FaceTime. We wouldn't have any social media to, we would be sending letters to each other. It's like
Yeah, yeah.
so
That's a good point. That's a good point. I mean, maybe very feeling very grateful about that. Yeah, in
no,
the 90s, I would have just been like at home playing my Game Boy all day, probably.
exactly. No, yeah. And it's also I was just thinking about this just as we were talking.
Mm.
The nightclub absence also must mean that does this change the role for DJs in general? Because are nightclubs now, but I mean, with the vaccine, right? A
Yeah.
lot of people are kind of skeptical of even wanting to take it right now, no
Yes.
matter what they
Right.
tell them, no matter the studies.
Mm.
And is that going to create a culture where people are not going to, I mean, post COVID, how can I explain this? Even post COVID, are
Mhm.
people going to want to gather? And will
Right.
that change the the the
Mm.
the trade of the DJ? Will nightclubs kind of
Yeah.
resort
Right.
to a streaming service that's going to DJ for clubs instead of having a person there? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the crazy times. It's just
Right. Right.
I came across your segment and I thought you
Mm.
explained a lot of
Mm.
things perfectly. And how can people find your segment on
Oh,
YouTube?
well, yeah, I'll start with, yeah, well, to answer that question, if you just look up CBC, the non-essentials, non-essentials,
Yeah.
those videos should come up. I've got one on handshakes, I've got one on the nightclub, and I've got one on offices. Somehow those are all
Handshakes,
connected.
I need to check those out. I mean, that's I was
Yeah, yeah.
also thinking about that. I mean,
You know,
everything, as you know,
yeah.
we're just learning on the go. I mean,
Right,
we don't
right.
really know how
Oh
everything's
my
gonna
goodness.
work out.
Totally,
And,
totally.
it just made me think in general, it's like, what is the
Okay.
future of nightclubs
For
and
sure.
nightlife gonna
I
look
mean,
like?
you bring up a really good question of like, will
Yeah.
people actually feel comfortable, gathering together in tight, spaces like a nightclub again?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I'm curious for your thoughts on it too, actually, because I really, to me, this is a big question mark of sorts. I think, a lot of people's uh, perception of safety, I think, exists on a bit of a spectrum. There are going to be some people that are just going to be spooked out for years and years
Yeah.
to come. And honestly, frankly, it might just take a new generation for
It's
that, like,
true, it's true,
or it
it's
just might
completely
take
true.
people born after this pandemic to like really
Yeah.
kind of feel comfortable again. But I also
Coronial.
know that, like, yeah, right, the coronials. I love it.
Yeah.
But I also know that there are some people that even during this pandemic they've been totally fine going to house parties filled with other
It's
people. So
Do you see
you
that
know,
I mean, with friends and
oh
people that you know? I mean, I see that I noticed that this whole COVID thing has really radicalized people on both sides, in my opinion. I feel that there's people that take it completely like, they're being
Mm,
safe, and I completely understand that. They're being safe, locked down,
right.
following everything, trying to protect everybody. And then you
Mhm.
got the ones that say, "You can't tell me to do this. I won't do this." And then it's like
Oh.
it's just it makes me question that, with everything with the lockdowns and the restrictions. I notice that even if some business owners are complaining that these lockdowns are hurting their business, if
Mm.
you even lifted the restrictions, there's still going to be that 50%, in my opinion, that are still not going to show up. So either way, your business is still going to be hurting.
Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the incredible polarization of opinions about something that, on the surface seems so simple to understand, a virus that's spreading,
Yeah.
virally, is has been astonishing for me as well. And I suspect you're right that, even after the vaccines have rolled out and everyone's been immunized to some extent, there are a lot of people that are going to be, still uncomfortable with the idea of, even like touching a door handle or like,
Yeah. It's
like let's say like hand sanitizer is
toilet
still going to be
paper.
a hot product in 2021, right? But
Toilet paper too. People are gonna be
uh,
looking back.
man, it's
I
so
I it
ridiculous.
just shows you a society is that
Oh, dude, people can like. I mean, truly, if this pandemic has shown me anything, it's like the true spectrum of mentalities that exist within our society. And I'm not trying to shit on
yeah,
any one of them because, like, I think, like, hey,
yeah,
if you're panicked and you're like, toilet paper is the thing that's going to give me a sense of
and comfort.
security and comfort, go for it. Why not?
Yeah,
Why not?
no, I
Other
completely
people have,
understand,
I mean,
yeah.
other people have resorted to alcohol. Other people, like, there's like many other vices we have gone
That's
to
true.
to
Home
make
workouts,
ourselves feel. Home
things like
workouts, yeah, exactly. Meditation, baking sourdough bread. But
Yeah,
I think at the end of it all, like, once we come out of this pandemic, which is really the question I have on my end, like, how much will that change people back, right? Like, once we've kind of been, I mean,
it's
yeah,
yeah, no,
right,
I completely I understand where you're coming from. I
yeah,
mean, thinking back to when I was starting off high school, I remember that the
yeah,
whole September 11th thing happened, and it has just changed the world as it was. And then we went from that to now not carrying liquids on planes and taking our shoes
right,
off, and then we kind of adjusted, and that's something that I was actually
totally.
kind of talking about in my
Mhm.
introduction episode. If it taught me anything, the mind is stronger than what we think, and on top of that, we can adapt easily to a lot of different
Mhm.
environments, and that's something that I've learned and taken away from this whole pandemic. It's
Right,
just it's just crazy. I mean, it's just
yeah,
with this nightlife, that's the only thing that was meant to entertain us, and sports, of
mm.
course.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
I truly don't know how things are gonna start
yeah,
changing. I mean, eventually the
absolutely.
income is gonna. I mean, if we take sports for example,
Mm.
eventually the absence of fans is gonna start taking a hit
Of
financially.
course, of
They won't be able
course.
to pay those players that much money, right?
For
So
sure, for sure. And with nightclubs too, like, I mean, who knows? I think to some extent, the nightclub industry could this could be a final chapter of sorts. And
yeah,
but I mean, I think the way that you're describing though is like, does it have to be that tragic? Does it have to be so? To some people, maybe it was quite a good riddance moment. These nightclubs that were playing all the same music and doing all the same dances and you know charging all the same covers. Like maybe their time was done, or like they had their time, and like are
take
there
it back to
other
the basics.
forms?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like,
Maybe it's an
can we?
opportunity.
Yeah, it's an
Yeah,
opportunity to go back to maybe or to reconsider,
yeah,
revisit other types of nightlife. And to me, like if I have to set out any sort of suggestions or criteria for what I'd personally like that type of nightlife to be, I think it's one that is you know much more focused on cultivating creativity, culture, yeah, like invention to some extent.
yeah.
One that is much more based on accessibility and trying to bring more people in rather than say like, oh, like there's going to be a huge lineup and only the hottest chicks are
Don't
going to
you
get in.
hate
Like,
that? Don't you hate that? They just
it's
made people wait in the cold or in the heat for
dude, it's
hours just to make it
crazy. And
look like And they all took the
like
same game book, and then you walk in and it's an empty club inside.
yeah, yeah. It's a complete illusionary trick of sorts,
Yeah.
and so like I think to some extent, that sort of nightlife. I don't know if many people are actually all that sad that it's gone to some
Yeah. No,
extent,
I believe. Yeah.
and so for me, like this kind of you know uh, decline in nightclubs, which was happening before the
It
pandemic,
was.
mind you,
People
right?
forget that. A lot of
Right.
things were actually in decline. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Like I bring it up in the video, but there are many reasons, like the invention of what is it, dating apps such as Tinder and
Mhm.
Bumble. They've really facilitated hookups to happen in spaces outside of the nightclub, which honestly, for a lot of people, that was sort of the function
The
of the
reason of going
nightclub,
to
right?
nightclubs. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So no, there like factors like that, just changing tastes in general, and of course the price had gone up for nightclubs quite significantly. So, I think in the absence of a nightclub that is catering to like high end clientele and like really like
Yeah.
hormonal 20-year-olds,
Yeah.
we could reinvent our nightlife in one that is much more culturally rooted in
No,
the
I
cities
understand
that
that.
were right. Like how cool would it be if like Seattle's nightlife had a distinct Seattle vibe to it, or Vancouver's
Exactly.
nightlife was
Yeah.
had Vancouver musicians and DJs and artists all playing their music.
That could very well happen, especially with the travel restrictions, and not just
Oh yeah.
through to different countries like Canada and the United States, but even within
Mhm.
provinces and states.
Right.
Some people, I mean, with the restrictions, that could you brought a great point up. That could
Mm.
actually happen. I mean, all
Right.
Vancouver musicians just being in Vancouver, LA
Right.
musicians just being in LA. It's a
Maybe,
it
but we're just being forced into that kind of,
exactly.
thing. And there's nothing wrong with regional sort of collaborations. I'm not poo-pooing on that at any one
Yeah.
point, but I think there's, something I mean, everyone knows that the nightclub playing like the top 50 hits, right? They're
Yeah.
playing Timbaland every night. Like they're not exactly
It's not.
creating
Yeah.
anything new, right? And
Exactly.
so I'd be really curious to see that money, that economy, that industry sort of shift towards something that's more locally oriented, so that we can highlight sort of up and coming artists in our own respective cities. I think that sounds
Exactly.
like a pretty cool idea to me.
No, that is a great idea, and it's just something also that you brought up. It's true.
Mm.
On your segment, you brought up people buying condos next to where nightclubs or popular nightclubs used to be,
Right.
and it's like, well, first of all,
Yeah.
let's use Vancouver as an example.
Mhm.
I know a lot of the listeners, I mean, are not familiar with Vancouver, but in the downtown center, there is two stadiums. There's BC Place, which
Mhm.
is the soccer stadium, and then you
Right.
have the arena where the Grizzlies
Hockey's
and the
play. Yeah.
Canucks used to play.
Yeah.
I
Rest in
never
peace,
understood.
Grizzlies.
Yeah, I know. It still hurts a lot.
No,
And the
man.
Supersonics too.
Uh,
And the thing is that, I just never quite understood why somebody would try to plan a family or have a family and move
mhm.
right next to an entertainment district
Yeah.
and then complain. I remember reports about 6 years ago, people complaining that the lights from the arena was distracting them. Well, the same situation happens to people that live next to airports. I mean,
Yep, exactly. Or train tracks, or yeah, this thing happens all the time. Like, I think the city can be sometimes misguided or won't anticipate the consequences of bringing residential development so close to frankly, like intense activities, right? Nightlife
yeah,
being one of them, but obviously there's like industry as well, right? Like, sometimes in Vancouver, like we've had like industrial areas of the city shut down because people moved close to them. And
and then
then
they complain.
they're complaining. And now it's like, okay, all right, then there goes like, 200 jobs away to some other city. Like it's kind
Exactly.
of, I think there's something to be critically examined there. And it's not just Vancouver. It's a lot of cities now are
They're all following that
pursuing, yeah, they're pursuing a model of what I'd call like downtown
community.
revitalization,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
the
and
community feel that it's not a
yeah,
downtown anymore, it's your neighborhood park.
yeah, exactly, exactly. They want
Yeah,
families living downtown. They want people with dogs downtown doing their yoga, having fancy coffees, eating at really high end restaurants. Which, like, I'm conflicted about it because I understand the reason why city planners, developers, city councils would want that sort of development, right? Like, who doesn't like real estate prices going up? Who
Yeah.
doesn't want downtowns getting a little bit more like residentially filled with people? There's a sustainability argument to be made there too, right? We
Yeah.
don't want people like living far out in the suburbs, that creates a lot of gas emissions, right?
Yes. Yes.
But we are sort of not. I think there's sort of we've forgotten that like that is going to come with other consequences, and that is now
Exactly.
sort of coming
Jobs.
up against jobs, and just frankly speaking, like a nightlife, a night culture, right?
And night culture, and it loses its identity too when you have that
Totally.
happen. I mean, it gains and there's losses too, in my opinion.
Right.
I mean, with, for example, if you look at Vancouver, it lost that gritty image it used to have in the 80s, where it
Right.
was a mix of everything. I mean, that's
Mm.
gone. It's all glass skyscrapers with condos. And
Right.
I mean, it also makes you think too with, we're I know we're mostly talking about nightclubs, but if you think about restaurants, how many of them are actually going to survive
Mm.
overall? Because it's not an easy industry itself. I mean, you have
Of course, super
restaurants that
slim
are hit or
margins.
miss. They don't survive
Right.
as is. It takes about a couple times to start
Yeah.
a new restaurant to
Yeah,
are they gonna
totally.
take the Pizza Hut model? If you remember back in the '90s when we were kids, they used to
Oh.
be dine-in
Oh yeah.
locations, and then
Right.
they converted into these express, and they used to
Yeah.
have buffets, if you remember that. Our restaurants are gonna take that role too, it's
I,
crazy, you know?
you know, I, you know, I had, I just, you're totally right. I'm just realizing now, like, oh yeah, as a kid, I went to Pizza Hut for occasions. Now it's
Yeah,
like you order it.
exactly, you take out order, and they were
Yeah.
already on that, and if you notice, a
Yeah.
lot of these restaurants are trying super hard to become innovative and thinking that they're going to build an outdoor facility with heaters so they can actually
Right.
have clientele. But I mean, I just you gotta.
Mm.
I'm assuming that just like nightclubs are trying to figure it out because you can't just gather everybody in one room.
Mhm.
But I just wonder if a new innovation is going to happen where it becomes all express.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I'd be sad if that was the case. I really hope that people
Yes.
reconsider. You know. Yeah. Yeah. But what I do get is like,
I completely understand where
yeah.
you're coming from as well
Right.
because I kind of miss sitting at a bar. I miss
Yeah.
talking to people. I know there's people that are still in denial and they're still going to be doing that regardless of what we say. But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
are they going to survive long term as
Right.
is?
Right. For sure. I'll say this. I think like coming out of this, like uh, uh I feel like, not being overly prescriptive is our way to go. And
Yeah,
there are going to be some people right now who are scared for their lives, and they're very, very comfortable being home and, just chilling,
yeah.
ordering takeout every now and then, hanging out with their family or partner. Nobody should be telling those people to, now you have to go back out, support your restaurants and, go
Yeah.
clubbing again. That's fine. But I also think there are a lot of people right now who are incredibly lonely and
Yeah.
bored and wanting to get the hell out of their tiny Vancouver condo. Are you seeing my background? Very small.
Yeah, yeah, no, I
Like,
can understand. Yeah,
right,
I
like,
can only
eh,
imagine. I mean, can you imagine being a student, international student or
oh
whatever,
my god, yeah.
and because of the travel restrictions, you're
Mm,
stuck somewhere that you're
totally.
studying, you like it, but it's not
Right.
home where
Yeah.
you can't see
Oh,
anybody
and now
during the
your
holidays as
classes
well,
are online. Your
and you
classes are
never
online, and the whole reason you came to this new country is because you wanted to go to school. Like,
meet people and in network and
yeah,
you're
yeah, here
eating
we are.
pajamas for, like, every day. It's like
Totally, totally. You're here in 600 square feet, you know?
yeah,
Yeah,
and
I think, yeah, I mean, so, like, with that in mind, like, I think, like, uh, uh, in the same breath, like, we should not be shaming people for wanting that as well. Shouldn't be
exactly.
shaming people for that. So, as we come out of this pandemic, I think it's gonna be a mixed response.
It
It's
will,
gonna be
yeah.
some people are super, super gung ho about getting back out there, meeting people again, hugging, kissing, all that good stuff that humans can do. But then there's gonna be some people that are also like, they're at
Don't
home and
judge
they're
me.
very okay with it.
Yeah, I need to watch that video again. I really appreciate
Yeah.
you letting me know about that, and then to all the listeners too about the handshake. That I never
Oh.
it never
Oh.
boggled my mind that in business, that's going to change dramatically.
Oh man.
I mean, that was aside from everything, I mean, I work in an
Yeah.
office environment, and I know you
Right.
came up with a office video that I need to also watch as well, because those two things go hand in hand when you're
Some
working in an
homework
office.
for yourself and the listeners.
Exactly. So it's going to be interesting to see that, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's just life is just not the same anymore moving
Yeah,
forward. It's just crazy.
absolutely. Well, I'm reminded of what you just said earlier. Like, humans are incredible in their capacity to adapt,
Yeah.
and that
We'll
gives
never
me some
notice that
optimism.
either.
Yeah, and we will hardly notice it. Just like right now, we don't really notice that. Oh yeah, we can't take a. You obviously can't take a water bottle, with water on the plane with you. Like nobody questions that anymore. Maybe in the future, nobody's gonna question that we're elbow bumping instead of
Or masks,
handshaking.
maybe this is a permanent thing for the time being.
Yeah, the
I mean,
mask.
seatbelts, they were saying that people used to
Right,
complain about seatbelts in
right,
vehicles. You can't tell me to wear a seatbelt in my own car.
right.
Everybody now complies. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah,
Society, time change. People, we're incredibly moldable to some
exactly.
extent. We're not made out of concrete. We're molten glass to some extent. So, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you and I both like. I'm curious about what happens, and and vigilant about it. I think again,
It's true.
there's an opportunity here, and I don't like to just like use that word willy nilly, but like there is an opportunity here for us to care a lot more about how we build back.
Yeah, it's
We're
always
not on
important.
autopilot anymore. We can pilot how this recovery happens.
Yeah, and then the nice thing is the potential of what we can obtain from all this, and for the future generations to learn from how we handled these things. I
Yeah,
mean, that's also
or how we
not to
failed to
forget.
handle it.
Exactly, and they'll be studying this, and
Yeah. Oh my
the
God.
history books are going to be studying all this. I
Dude.
mean, we're eventually going to be talking about this when we're older.
Do you
I mean,
yeah, do you like, oh man, when we're like, when we're on our 80s,
yeah,
90s, like this is gonna be like freaking this is gonna be like World War II. Like this is gonna be a
yeah,
really significant moment in history. And
become that public
yeah.
speaker for that school. Back in my days, in the
Yeah, it's true.
1920s.
Yeah. We'll have COVID veterans. No, sorry, this sounds very insensitive now. That's
No, no, I know
obviously
completely understand.
we haven't been through an actual war, but I think we've come away. Everyone has come away from this with, just an incredible
If you
amount of
Yeah. If you think
change.
about it, it's kinda like a biological war that we're all fighting this
Dude,
invincible enemy.
humans versus like
Virus.
a disease, yeah,
Uh-huh.
a virus, right? That's what this war has been about.
As it
Totally.
started in fiction in movies, if you remember, has now
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I do remember there were like all these movies in the mid 2000s, I think Contagion one being one of them, where
yeah,
like, it was a foreshadowing clearly.
yeah, no,
Watching
definitely.
that being like, "Oh yeah, that could happen," but oh, it'll never happen. It'll never
And then
happen.
you
And
see
then
it, and then you
lo and
saw the
behold,
people panicking, and then you're like, "Oh,
yeah,
wow, the
all right, here
grocery
we
stores
are.
are empty." Yeah, no, I completely understand that. So, I mean, for all the listeners, no, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Is there any way that people can reach out to you or find you on social media? I mean, aside from YouTube, do you have anything that you can, or any links that you can lead people
Yeah,
to?
thanks, Drew. I appreciate the opportunity to sort of give myself a plug here. So you can follow About Here videos on Instagram and Twitter. So that's just About Here videos, one word. But the main way to find most of my work is to just look up CBC About Here. A lot of my work is posted to CBC Vancouver's YouTube channel. They're sort of my main contractors, my main sort of client, let's say. But I also have my own individual channel, which is just About Here.
About here,
So
okay.
yeah, so you can.
I'm really excited to watch your video on the future of handshakes. I think you make really great
Yeah,
segments. I really, really
I
do.
appreciate that so much.
Anytime. Mr. Utaye, video producer for CBC, ladies and gentlemen. Well, that's a wrap to this episode. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and checking out the new episode on Dro and Know podcast. If you like what you hear, please make sure to hit subscribe. Until next time, I will see you all later, and I want everybody to have a safe and enjoy your week. Checking out. Peace.
Broadcasting live and direct from the Pacific Northwest.
Representando a todos los Alvis en los Estados Unidos con Dro Breeze.
You are listening to
You already know.
the Dro in the Know podcast with your host,
The one and only
Dro Breeze.